bother going to Congress for most things at this point, and just says we can do it on our own. So there's that feeling of sort of inability to actually get anything done. With Green's exit, I think that opened the door to, if enough leave to deny Mike Johnson a majority, even temporarily, that would be chaotic and unprecedented in a way we haven't seen. Because what does happen if enough Republican lawmakers leave, that you do have a situation where we see with Kevin McCarthy, where the speaker is removed from power, and the Democrats are the ones with a technical majority enough to put Hakeem Jeffrey in the seat. What does that even look like? How does that work? And the fact that we're even considering it shows how sort of fragile the Republican majority really is.
Yet another unprecedented scenario. Let me ask you about the scathing Truth Social post in which the president wrote blasting a New York Times reporter, accusing him of showing signs of aging and fatigue. Let's go over some of the highlights. Here they go. He called the article a hit piece, said everything the New York Times writes about him is purposely negative, referred to the publication as an enemy of the people, and called the writer of that article a third-rate reporter who is ugly both inside and out. I think it's pretty safe to say he was not very happy with that piece, right, and that reporter. But you say all this does is prove the point. How so?
I think that if you are pushing 80 and unwilling to admit, yes, I am aging, yes, I am slowing down, yes, some things may take me longer, but I'm doing it the best I can, that I think, and just pretending it's not happening, that is a hit to your credibility. I know that the mythos that he's putting out there, this aura of invincibility, that he is eternal, that he is so powerful, so strong, the utmost of masculinity. I know that is what he puts out there to his base.
Okay, so the White House is in absolute chaos right now because medical records that were supposed to be completely sealed, completely private, just got leaked to the press. And we're not talking about some random lab work or a routine checkup. We're talking about MRI results that allegedly show serious cognitive decline, potential neurological issues that raise massive questions about Trump's fitness to serve as President of the United States. This is unprecedented. This is the kind of leak that doesn't just dominate a news cycle. It potentially triggers constitutional crises about the 25th Amendment, about who's actually running the country, about whether the American people were lied to during the campaign about Trump's health. Republicans are in full meltdown mode behind closed doors, allies are privately expressing alarm, and Democrats are already talking about what mechanisms exist to address a situation where the president may not be mentally capable of fulfilling his duties. This isn't political spin. This isn't partisan attacks. This is about medical documentation that apparently shows objective evidence of decline. And it changes absolutely everything about the next few months of American politics. And here's the thing. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore to give you the unfiltered truth about what's actually in these documents and what they mean. They're going to hedge. They're going to both sides it. They're going to bring on talking heads who'll spin this in every direction except honest analysis. That's why we built this channel, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. We dig into the documents, we talk to medical experts, we explain what the implications actually are for governance and power. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day, breaking down stories like this before the mainstream media even figures out how to frame them. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth, about understanding what's really happening at the highest levels of American government. All right, let's get back to the video. Here's what happened. According to multiple reports that broke late yesterday, MRI scans of Trump's brain, conducted at Walter Reed Medical Center within the last 6 months, were leaked to journalists at several major outlets. And the contents are absolutely devastating. The scans apparently show what multiple neurologists who've reviewed them describe as significant white matter lesions, evidence of reduced brain volume in areas associated with memory and executive function, and patterns consistent with vascular dementia or early-stage Alzheimer's disease. Now, we need to be careful here, because we're not doctors, and we're not making a diagnosis. But what we can tell you is that at least 3 board-certified neurologists who were shown the images independently, without knowing whose brain they were looking at, all flagged serious concerns about cognitive impairment. One of them, a professor at Johns Hopkins who specializes in age-related neurological conditions, reportedly said the scans show a level of deterioration you'd expect to see in someone in their late 70s or early 80s, with moderate to severe cognitive decline, not someone who's supposed to be running the most powerful country on earth. And this is where things start to unravel in ways that go far beyond just medical privacy, because the leak itself raises enormous questions. Who had access to these MRI results? How did they get out? Was this someone inside Walter Reed? Was it someone in the White House medical unit? Was it a political operative who thought the American people needed to know? Or was it a foreign intelligence service that somehow obtained Trump's medical records and is now using them to destabilize American governance? We don't know yet, but what we do know is that this kind of leak doesn't happen by accident. Medical records, especially for the President of the United States, are supposed to be protected by multiple layers of security, by HIPAA regulations, by national security protocols. For them to get out means either there was a catastrophic security failure or someone with access deliberately chose to expose this information because they believed the public had a right to know, or because they wanted to damage Trump politically. But it gets worse. Because according to sources who've spoken to reporters on background, this isn't the first time concerns about Trump's cognitive state have been raised inside the White House. Apparently, senior staff have been quietly worried for months about what they describe as increasing confusion, memory lapses, difficulty following complex policy discussions, and moments where Trump seems disoriented or unable to track conversations. One former senior official who left the administration earlier this year reportedly told investigators that there were multiple instances where Trump would lose his train of thought mid-sentence, where he'd forget the names of world leaders he'd met with multiple times, where he'd ask the same question repeatedly in the same meeting as if he had no memory of having just asked it. And when staff would try to gently redirect him or remind him of things he'd said or decided, he'd sometimes become angry and defensive, insisting he never said that, never made that decision, accusing people of lying or conspiring against him. Now, the White House is obviously denying all of this. The press secretary put out a statement calling the leak a disgraceful violation of medical privacy, a politically motivated attack, and insisting that Trump is in excellent health, that he's sharper than ever, that these reports are completely false. But here's the problem with that response. If the MRI scans are real, if they actually show what the neurologists say they show, then denying it doesn't make it go away. And if the scans have been misrepresented, if this is somehow a doctored image or a misinterpretation, then the White House needs to release Trump's full medical records to prove it. But they're not doing that. They're just issuing blanket denials and attacking the media for reporting on it, which is exactly what you'd do if you were trying to hide something you couldn't defend. And the political implications here are absolutely massive. Because if there's credible evidence that the President of the United States is experiencing significant cognitive decline, that raises immediate questions about the 25th Amendment. For those who don't know, the 25th Amendment to the Constitution provides a mechanism for removing a president who's unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. Section 4, which has never been invoked, allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare the president incapable, at which point the vice president immediately becomes acting president. Now, that's an incredibly high bar, and it's designed to be, because you're essentially overriding the will of the voters and removing an elected president. But it exists precisely for situations like this, where there's a serious question about whether the president is mentally fit to serve. So the question becomes, what does Vice President J.D. Vance do with this information? What does the cabinet do? Because if they've seen these MRI results, if they've been briefed on Trump's cognitive state, if they've witnessed firsthand the kind of behavior that staffers have been describing, then they have a constitutional duty to act. But they also have a political calculation to make, because invoking the 25th Amendment would be the most explosive political moment in modern American history. It would tear the Republican Party apart. It would enrage Trump's base, who would see it as a coup, as a betrayal, as the deep state finally succeeding in taking him down. And it would put Vance in an impossible position, where he's seen as either a traitor to Trump or as someone who put country over party. So the incentive for Vance and the cabinet is to do nothing, to hope this blows over, to keep managing Trump and working around his limitations. But if the evidence of cognitive decline becomes impossible to ignore, if Trump starts making dangerous decisions because he's not thinking clearly, if there's a genuine national security crisis that requires a president who's fully capable, then they may not have a choice. And here's where the institutional piece gets really complicated, because Congress also has a role here. Under the 25th Amendment, if the president contests his removal, which Trump absolutely would, then Congress has to vote on it. 2/3 of both houses have to agree that the president is incapable in order to keep him removed. Otherwise, he gets his powers back. So you'd be looking at a situation where the House and Senate would have to weigh medical evidence, testimony from doctors, testimony from cabinet members and staff, and make a determination about Trump's fitness. And that process would be a political and constitutional nightmare. You'd have Republicans who are terrified of crossing Trump and his base, Democrats who've wanted him out of office since day one, and a deeply divided country watching every moment of what would essentially be a public trial of the president's mental competence. Now, let's break down what this actually means, because there are multiple dimensions here, and they're all critical. First, understand that cognitive decline in a president is not just a personal health issue, it's a national security issue. The President of the United States has access to the nuclear codes. He makes decisions about war and peace, about deploying troops, about responding to threats from adversaries. He negotiates with foreign leaders. He sets economic policy. He appoints judges and cabinet members. All of that requires mental clarity, the ability to process complex information, the ability to think strategically, and make sound judgments under pressure. If Trump's cognitive abilities are genuinely declining, if he's having trouble with memory and executive function, then every one of those responsibilities becomes more dangerous. You could have situations where he misunderstands intelligence briefings, where he makes impulsive decisions because he's not fully grasping the consequences, where foreign leaders take advantage of his confusion to manipulate him into agreements that aren't in America's interests. Second, this raises enormous questions about what the White House has been hiding and for how long. Because if these MRI scans are from 6 months ago, and they show significant decline, then when did this process start? Was Trump already experiencing cognitive issues during the 2024 campaign? Were voters lied to about his health? Did his campaign and his doctors knowingly conceal evidence of mental deterioration in order to win the election? Those aren't just ethical questions, they're potentially legal questions. There are disclosure requirements for presidential candidates. There are norms around transparency about health, and if Trump and his team deliberately hid evidence of serious cognitive problems, that's a betrayal of public trust on a scale we've rarely seen, and it would raise questions about the legitimacy of his entire presidency. Third, this is going to have immediate effects on Trump's ability to govern, because even if the 25th Amendment isn't invoked, even if Vance and the cabinet decide not to act, the mere existence of these leaked MRI results is going to undermine Trump's authority. Members of Congress are going to be less willing to defer to him, less willing to support his agenda, more willing to assert their own institutional power. Foreign leaders are going to see this as a sign of weakness, a sign that American leadership is compromised, and they're going to adjust their strategies accordingly. Allies are going to be worried about whether Trump can be trusted to make commitments and follow through. Adversaries like Russia and China are going to see an opportunity to test American resolve, to push boundaries, to see if a cognitively impaired president will respond effectively, or whether they can get away with things they wouldn't normally risk. Fourth, the political ramifications for 2026 and beyond are staggering, because if Trump is seen as mentally unfit, that completely changes the Republican Party's calculation. You're going to have Republicans who start openly calling for him to step down, who argue that the party needs to move on, that they can't go into the midterms with a president who's losing his mental faculties. You're going to have a fierce internal battle over whether to rally around Trump or to distance themselves from him. And you're going to have Democrats who are going to make Trump's cognitive state a central issue in every single race, who are going to argue that Republicans knew he was declining and did nothing, that they put party over country, that they enabled a dangerous situation because they were afraid of his base. Fifth, there's a credibility crisis with the American people that goes beyond just Trump. Because if the medical establishment, if the White House doctors, if the people who are supposed to be providing objective assessments of the president's health, if they've been covering this up or downplaying it, then trust in those institutions is going to collapse. People are going to ask, what else are we being lied to about? What other information is being hidden? How can we trust anything coming out of official channels if they're willing to conceal something this serious? And that erosion of trust makes it even harder to govern, even harder to respond to crises because people stop believing what they're told by authorities. Sixth, and this is absolutely critical, there's a legal dimension here that could get incredibly messy. Because leaking someone's medical records, even the president's, is illegal under HIPAA. Whoever released these MRI scans could face serious criminal charges. But at the same time, there's going to be an argument that this was whistleblowing, that someone saw evidence of a serious threat to national security and felt they had a duty to expose it. And that tension between protecting medical privacy and protecting the country is going to play out in courts, in Congress, in the media. You could have a situation where the leaker is prosecuted but also seen as a hero by a significant portion of the public. And that's going to create yet another layer of division and controversy. And then there's the international dimension, which is potentially the most dangerous. Because if America's adversaries believe the president is cognitively impaired, they're going to act on that belief. Russia might escalate in Ukraine, calculating that Trump won't respond effectively. China might move more aggressively on Taiwan, testing whether a weakened American president will follow through on commitments to defend allies. Iran might push harder on its nuclear program. North Korea might conduct more provocative missile tests. And in each of those scenarios, you have the risk of miscalculation, of situations spiraling out of control because adversaries misjudge how the United States will respond. That's how wars start, not because anyone particularly wants them, but because one side thinks the other side won't act, and they turn out to be wrong. Now, let's talk about what happens next, because this is moving incredibly fast and there are multiple possible trajectories. The immediate focus is going to be on verification. News organizations that receive the leaked MRI scans are going to be working with independent medical experts to authenticate them, to confirm they're actually Trump's scans, to get additional professional opinions on what they show. The White House is going to be under enormous pressure to respond, either by releasing Trump's full medical records to disprove the claims, or by providing some kind of explanation for what the scans show that's less alarming than cognitive decline. Trump himself is likely to go on the offensive, attacking the media, attacking whoever leaked the information, insisting this is all a hoax or a deep state plot. And that response is actually going to be telling, because one of the signs of cognitive decline is often a lack of insight, an inability to recognize one's own limitations, and a tendency to react with anger and defensiveness when those limitations are pointed out. At the same time, Congress is going to have to decide how to handle this. Do they launch an investigation? Do they call hearings? Do they subpoena White House staff and medical personnel to testify under oath about Trump's cognitive state? Democrats are almost certainly going to push for that, and some Republicans might quietly support it, especially those who are worried about what this means for the country and for their own political futures. But it's going to be incredibly contentious because Trump's allies are going to see any investigation as a political witch hunt, as an attempt to overturn the results of the election, and they're going to fight it every step of the way. You're also going to see a lot of activity behind the scenes. Cabinet members are going to be having very serious, very private conversations about what they know, what they've observed, and what their constitutional obligations are. The vice president is going to be in an extraordinarily difficult position because anything he says or does is going to be scrutinized for signs that he's either preparing to invoke the 25th Amendment or that he's covering for Trump. Foreign governments are going to be reaching out through back channels trying to get a read on whether Trump is actually impaired, whether American commitments can still be trusted, whether they need to start making contingency plans. And then there's the question of what the American people do with this information. Because unlike a lot of political scandals that are complex or abstract, cognitive decline is something people can understand. They've seen it in their own families, in aging parents or grandparents. They know what it looks like when someone starts to lose their mental sharpness. And if the evidence is clear, if doctors are saying these scans show serious problems, It's going to be very difficult for Trump's supporters to dismiss it as fake news. Some will, of course. The hardcore MAGA base will never accept that Trump is anything less than perfectly healthy and perfectly sharp. But the marginal voters, the people who supported Trump but aren't in the cult of personality, they're going to have serious doubts. And that's going to show up in polling. It's going to show up in special elections. And it's ultimately going to show up in 2026. There's also a scenario where this forces Trump's hand in ways we can't fully predict. If he's feeling cornered, if he's watching his presidency unravel, if he's being told by people he trusts that he needs to step down, his response could be to do something dramatic to prove he's still in charge. And that's where things could get genuinely dangerous. Because a president who's trying to prove his mental fitness might make reckless decisions, might take unnecessary risks in foreign policy or economic policy, might push boundaries just to show he can. And that's the nightmare scenario, where cognitive decline combines with ego and desperation to produce genuinely dangerous leadership. So here's the bottom line. This MRI leak, if it's real, if it shows what experts say it shows, is not just a health story. It's a constitutional crisis in the making. It raises fundamental questions about Trump's fitness to serve, about what mechanisms exist to address a situation where the president is cognitively impaired, about whether the people around him will do their constitutional duty, or whether they'll cover for him out of political loyalty. It's going to dominate American politics for weeks, if not months. It's going to affect Trump's ability to govern. It's going to reshape the dynamics of the 2026 midterms, and it's going to send shockwaves through the international system as allies and adversaries try to figure out what this means for American leadership. This is the kind of moment that defines presidencies, that defines eras. And the way it gets handled, the way institutions respond, the way the American people process this information is going to have consequences that last for years. Keep your eyes on what the White House does in the next 48 hours. Keep your eyes on whether any cabinet members break ranks. Keep your eyes on how Republican leaders in Congress respond. And keep your eyes on the medical experts who are going to weigh in on what these scans actually show. Because this story is far from over, and where it goes from here could determine the future of American democracy